At 4:18 p.m. local time, the surface picture changed. Multiple Venezuelan warships adjusted course within minutes of each other. The movement was not abrupt. It was controlled. Bearings shifted by small degrees. Speed increased slightly, just enough to reduce separation. From a distance, the changes were easy to miss. There were no radio transmissions. No warnings were issued. No declarations followed. On the open ocean, the moment passed without sound, but the geometry had already begun to change. The U.S. Navy destroyer continued on its planned route. Course remained steady. Speed did not vary. To an outside observer, nothing appeared unusual. The sea state was calm. Visibility was clear. Merchant traffic remained distant, but relative spacing was closing. Each Venezuelan ship maintained alignment from a different angle. Individually, the movements looked routine. Collectively, they formed a pattern. Bearings converged. Separation reduced gradually, minute by minute. This was no longer incidental presence. Distance is not neutral at sea. When it changes without communication, intent becomes part of the equation. And at 4:18 p.m., intent was being tested through movement alone. Inside the destroyer, the shift was already understood. Surface contact were stable. Headings were consistent. Speed adjustments were recorded. No single maneuver triggered concern. It was the timing that mattered. Multiple ships had altered course within the same window. Pressure does not announce itself. It develops through alignment. The destroyer's watch team monitored the picture without interruption. No alerts were raised. No commands were issued over bridge. The ship maintained its posture as if the surrounding water had not changed. But the operating space was narrowing. As distance closed, margins began to thin. Small corrections by the approaching ships became more frequent. Each adjustment reduced flexibility. Every degree of alignment committed them further. Still, the destroyer did not respond. At this stage, the encounter remained undefined. No thresholds had been crossed. No rules had been violated. Yet the conditions for a confrontation were now present. Time continued to pass. By 4:21 p.m., separation had decreased enough to require continuous monitoring. The surface picture no longer represented parallel movement. It represented convergence. What appeared deliberate on the surface remained unspoken beneath it. This was the first movement, not an attack, not a warning, but a decision to close distance. And once distance begins to close, every ship involved must choose how to respond. Long before proximity became visible on the horizon, the surface picture was already stable. Contact had been established earlier, tracked continuously through multiple sensor layers. Radar returned confirmed position and speed. Electro-optical systems provided visual classification as range permitted. Bearings updated automatically. Nothing appeared suddenly. Inside the U.S. Navy destroyer, the situation was not unfolding in real time. It was developing within an already understood framework. Every movement was measured against baseline data. Headings were compared. Speed changes were logged. Relative motion was calculated continuously. Small deviations stood out not because they were dramatic, but because they were synchronized. This is how intent becomes visible at sea, not through aggression, but through pattern. Individual ships can alter course for many reasons: sea conditions, navigation adjustments, routine maneuvering. But when multiple surface contacts adjust within the same time window, correlation replaces coincidence. That correlation had already been identified. The destroyer's combat information center did not react with urgency. There was no need to. The system was doing what it was designed to do, filtering noise from signal. What remained was a developing picture, not a surprise. Surprise depends on speed and ambiguity. Neither was present here. The Venezuelan ships were not accelerating aggressively. They were not executing sharp turns. Their movement was deliberate and controlled. That made it easier to track, not harder. Predictability simplifies detection. As the minutes passed, tracking quality improved. Angles stabilized. Speed profiles became consistent. The surface picture gained clarity rather than confusion. Inside the ship, The environment remained calm. Watchstanders continued routine reporting. Updates flowed steadily. No alerts broke the rhythm. No alarm sounded. The encounter did not interrupt normal operations. This was observation, not reaction. The destroyer did not need to guess what was happening. The geometry was already telling the story. Relative motion vectors indicated closing distance from multiple bearings. The pattern suggested coordination without communication. That distinction mattered. Coordination implies planning. Planning implies limits. Every planned movement reduces flexibility once executed. Each degree of alignment commits a ship further to a specific outcome. From a detection standpoint, this simplifies forecasting. The more deliberate the approach, the easier it becomes to anticipate. This is why proximity is rarely the first indicator of tension. Detection happens earlier, long before ships appear close to one another. Intent is already visible to those watching the data. Distance simply makes it obvious to everyone else. By the time the ships could be seen aligning visually, the destroyer was no longer gathering information. It was confirming what had already been assessed. The situation had moved beyond uncertainty. There was still no confrontation, no escalation, no response required. But surprise had already been removed from the equation. And once surprise disappears, control begins to take shape, quietly and without announcement. As the Venezuelan ships maintained close alignment, spacing continued to narrow. The reduction was gradual. No sharp turns were made. No sudden accelerations followed. Distance decreased through sustained parallel movement, measured in small increments over time. From the outside, the formation appeared controlled. From within the geometry, constraints were beginning to form. Close alignment requires constant correction. Minor deviations in speed or heading must be addressed immediately to preserve spacing. Each correction reduces available options. What begins as control slowly becomes commitment. That process was now underway. The Venezuelan ships adjusted repeatedly to maintain proximity. Small helm changes became more frequent. Speed variations increased slightly. These were not visible to the naked eye, but they were clear within the data. Movement was no longer free. As spacing compressed, maneuvering margins narrowed. Turning radius became limited. Acceleration options diminished. Every adjustment affected the others. This is the hidden cost of proximity. The closer ships move together, the less flexibility each retains. Geometry tightens. Choices disappear quietly. Externally, the posture suggested confidence. Internally, it demanded precision. Precision creates predictability. Patterns began to repeat. Corrections followed familiar sequences. Speed changes occurred at regular intervals. Heading stabilized within narrow ranges. What had been dynamic became consistent. Consistency simplifies anticipation. The destroyer did not need to respond to these changes. It only needed to observe them. Each correction provided information. Each maintained alignment revealed intent. The formation was holding itself together. That required effort. As minutes passed, the burden shifted. The Venezuelan ships were no longer influencing the operating space. They were preserving their own position within it. That distinction matters. Influence expands options. Preservation limits them. The tighter the alignment became, the fewer paths remained available. Breaking formation would require visible movement. Holding it required continuous adjustment. Either choice carried consequences. The movement patterns were now clear enough to forecast. Relative motion vectors repeated. Projected positions converged predictably. This did not mean the encounter was decided. It meant the variables were shrinking. Compression had reduced uncertainty, not increased it. What appeared assertive on the surface was creating internal constraints beneath it. Predictability replaced ambiguity. At sea, predictability favors the observer. The Venezuelan ships remained close. Alignment held. The formation looked intact, but the operating picture had changed. Flexibility had been traded for proximity. And once flexibility is reduced, initiative becomes harder to maintain, especially when the other side has not moved at all. The situation was approaching its next phase, not through action, but through the narrowing of options. The destroyer did not change course. Speed remained constant. Heading held steady. From the outside, the ship appeared indifferent to movement unfolding around it. No messages were sent. There were no radio calls. No bridge-to-bridge communication. No warnings transmitted. The absence of communication was deliberate. Silence was maintained not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. The response did not come through words. It came through positioning. Escort geometry adjusted subtly. Changes were small enough to avoid drawing attention. Bearings shifted by narrow margins. Distances changed just enough to alter angles without signaling intent. These movements were not announcements. They were calculations. Each adjustment reshaped the operating space. What had been a neutral area began to develop structure. Lines of movement shifted. Relative bearings altered the balance without introducing escalation. The Venezuelan ships remained close, but the space around them began to change. The destroyer continued forward, unaffected. Its posture communicated consistency. Stability sends a signal of its own. When one side remains unchanged while the other must adapt, pressure begins to reverse. The escorts did not mirror the Venezuelan alignment. They redefined it. By adjusting geometry rather than direction, the destroyer's formation expanded influence without compressing distance. Angles improved. Maneuvering options increased on one side while narrowing on the other. No one announced a shift, but it was happening. This is how control often changes hands at sea. Not through force, but through space. Not through commands, but through geometry. The Venezuelan ships now faced a different picture. Their alignment remained intact, but its effectiveness was fading. Each correction they made now responded to changes they did not initiate. Reaction replaced direction. That transition is subtle. It does not appear dramatic, but it is decisive. The destroyer did not accelerate. It did not alter posture. It did not acknowledge the encounter. Yet the engagement space was no longer symmetrical. Angles favored one side. Options widened for one formation and narrowed for the other. The operating picture began to lean, quietly and without warning. Silence amplified the effect. Without communication, intent had to be interpreted through movement alone. The destroyer offered no explanation, no cues, no confirmation. That uncertainty belonged to the other side. The Venezuelan ships continued to adjust. Small changes followed each shift in geometry. Corrections increased. The burden of maintaining position grew heavier. Meanwhile, the destroyer moved as if nothing had changed. This was the moment when response replaced reaction. No words were exchanged. No signals were given. No escalation occurred. Yet control had begun to move. Not visibly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. And once control shifts without being announced, it becomes difficult to reclaim. Sustaining pressure began to require effort. What had started as controlled alignment now demanded constant correction. Speed adjustments became more frequent. Heading changes tightened. Each Venezuelan ship worked continuously to preserve position relative to the others. Pressure was no longer effortless. Maintaining proximity at close range is not passive. It requires attention. Every small change by one ship forces a response from the rest. Over time, this creates friction. That friction was now visible. Corrections increased in frequency, but decreased in effectiveness. Alignment held, but only narrowly. The formation remained intact, yet it no longer shaped the engagement. It reacted to it. This was a shift. Direction had become response. When a formation reacts, initiative is already slipping. Instead of defining movement, it follows it. Instead of shaping space, it adapts to changes introduced elsewhere. The Venezuelan ships were now responding to geometry they did not create. Their alignment lost efficiency. Maintaining position consumed focus. Breaking alignment risked exposure. Holding it required constant adjustment. Neither option restored leverage. Predictability increased. Corrections followed recognizable patterns. Speed changes repeated at similar intervals. Heading adjustments occurred within narrowing limits. Movement became easier to anticipate. This is not a failure skill. It is a consequence of commitment. The closer ships align, the more they bind themselves to a shared outcome. Once flexibility is traded away, initiative becomes fragile. The destroyer did not need to exploit this directly. The shift occurred on its own. As predictability increased, influence decreased. Pressure stopped creating advantage. It began generating obligation. Every additional moment spent maintaining proximity increased exposure without improving position. This is the point where pressure loses value. Externally, the formation still appeared assertive. Distance remained close. Alignment held. Presence was visible. Internally, leverage was gone. The Venezuelan ships could no longer adjust freely. They could not disengage without consequence. They could not press further without risk. Options narrowed to maintenance alone. That is not control. That is constraint. This was the moment that mattered. Not when ships closed distance, not when alignment formed, but when movement stopped shaping the encounter and began preserving it. Initiative is defined by who forces adaptation. At this stage, the destroyer was no longer adapting at all. The burden had shifted entirely. Pressure had become weight, and weight, when unsupported by leverage, eventually has to be set down. The encounter had not ended, but its direction had already changed. Distance began to increase gradually. There was no single maneuver that marked the shift. Separation developed through a series of small adjustments. Speed differences emerged subtly. Relative bearings widened over time. Courses began to diverge. The change was not coordinated. Each Venezuelan ship altered course independently. Alignment loosened. The compressed geometry that had defined the encounter slowly relaxed. No signals accompanied the movement. No radio calls were made. No warnings were issued. The disengagement unfolded without communication, just as the encounter had developed. The destroyer continued its transit unchanged. Course remained steady. Speed held constant. There was no visible acknowledgement of the separation taking place around it. To an external observer, the ship appeared to be moving through routine operating conditions. As distance increased, maneuvering space expanded. Correction frequency decreased. Relative positions stabilized at wider angles. The operating picture simplified. What had required continuous monitoring returned to standard tracking. No escalation occurred. No additional assets entered the area. Airspace remained clear. Surface movement remained controlled. The encounter remained confined to positional change. The Venezuelan ships continued to separate. Each ship followed its own course. Speed variations increased slightly as formation discipline dissolved. The pressure that had once defined proximity no longer shaped movement. This phase unfolded without urgency. There were no abrupt turns, no rapid accelerations. Adjustments were measured and deliberate. The disengagement prioritized safety and predictability rather than display. The operating environment normalized. Sea state remained unchanged. Visibility stayed clear. External conditions did not influence the outcome. The resolution occurred independent of weather or traffic. Tracking continued until separation exceeded interaction thresholds. Once distance widened sufficiently, emphasis returned to routine monitoring. The surface picture no longer suggested engagement. The destroyer proceeded beyond the area without delay. Transit timelines were unaffected. Operational objectives remained intact. No deviation was required. The encounter concluded without incident. No weapons were employed. No communications were exchanged. No rules were tested. The outcome was defined entirely by movement. The lesson remained. Control had not shifted through force. It had not required warning or response. Silence had shaped the encounter from the beginning. Nothing dramatic marked the end. No final action signaled resolution. Separation simply continued until interaction ceased. The sea returned to normal traffic conditions. The destroyer advanced along its planned route. The surrounding ships followed separate paths. The operating picture resolved to standard conditions. The encounter ended as it had unfolded. Quietly, deliberately, without escalation. And in that silence, the outcome had already been decided.